Answer here. All right. Hey, looking good. Getting some speed rail. Speed rail. Well, that is interesting. Good morning. Good morning. This is cool. Oh, that's.
Hey.
Morning. Oh, because you've been doing the okay.
I am Stephen Robbins, and we are waiting on Christian Campbell, who, even as we speak, is walking into the Reefer Den. He'll be joining us from his venue in just a couple of moments. So enjoy the poster art until he gets a network connection.
Thanks. Let me get this network connection. All right. Hello. All right. Not be putting me on the network, so it doesn't matter. Here. Hello.
All right. Hello, everyone. This is Christian. He is just getting settled in the Reefer Den. Christian, welcome.
Oh, hello.
Christian,
Sorry,
hi.
I'm in the women's. I'm in the ladies' dressing room right now. So setting up. They're not here yet, so I can.
Okay, so I'm telling people you are in the Reefer Den. Could you tell us what that is, and what's reefer for people who don't know the term?
Okay, I guess we'll start with what is reefer. Reefer is a term for for marijuana or hemp, and sort of like slang, and it's been around since well, I think. Well, we definitely know that in the music of the 1920s and 30s, jazz music was singing about reefer, and when I get low, I get high. It was a great Ella Fitzgerald song, or she covered that song. So yeah, it's a term for marijuana and hemp, and then the Reefer Den is a music venue, a live music venue that we're in the midst of building right now. That's going to be hosting a show called Reefer Madness the musical. So that is the quick of it.
Awesome. By the way, what is the difference between marijuana and hemp?
Actually, there really is no difference. This is kind of a mix-up that's happened over the years. But cannabis is hemp, hemp is cannabis. It all comes from the same plant. But what has happened over the years is that cannabis is something that has THC in it, whereas the hemp plant is a plant that humans have been farming now for probably since agriculture times. Hemp is the strongest natural fiber in the world. It produces a lot of different products. Most of human clothing for human history was made from hemp. The ships of the British Empire and pretty much every other armada ever put afloat by any empire were run on hemp as it sails. The word canvas comes from cannabis. Any ship in the British Empire or even in the American fleet back in the days of sailing ships would have anywhere from, I think, like 30 tons of hemp aboard. And if you were a ship, you would have hemp seeds in massive casks ready to be grown, just in case you run aground anywhere, because then you just grow hemp and you could pretty much make all the rope, all the sails. You could make resin to seal up boards. You can do all sorts of things. So it was a huge industrial product for for millennia for human beings. But it was also used medicinally. Right up until 1936 in the United States, hemp was one of the top three prescribed, or hemp or cannabis was top three, prescribed molecules, one could say, make feel good, or to relieve pain, or for all sorts of things. So yeah.
So how did it become so? Well, first of all, so if hemp is cannabis and cannabis is hemp, and this has been used tremendously, as our listeners know, I typically take a business and take a business and a financial kind of perspective on things, or a business strategy thing, actually, more than financial. But okay, so we have this fiber hemp that has been used throughout human history, and suddenly it becomes reefer and becomes illegal and is like reefer madness. So what exactly is reefer madness for people who don't know the phrase, which is probably very few because it's a pretty common phrase? And how did hemp go from being this fabulous industrial product to suddenly being this thing that is whispered about in shadowy alleys, when your parents talk about the kids from the wrong side of the tracks?
Yeah. So first of all, I'll start with the Reefer Madness. There was a movie made in 1936 called Tell Your Children. And it was made by a church group with a little bit of government funding. And it was a 50-minute movie, a terrible movie, 50 minutes of your life you will never get back. That was all about the dangers of this new insidious thing about challenging America and coming for our children, called marijuana, right? And it was this ridiculous black and white film that just showed basically the actors taking one puff, and then suddenly they become murderous rapists, and their lives of degradation and everything just falls apart. And the movie was terrible and had didn't really go anywhere. But there was a filmmaker who did sort of he just would make racy films any way he could. He took it and he re-edited it and called Reefer Madness, and he just edited it and threw a couple of scenes of women pulling up their stockings, because that was salacious back in the day, and then released that out into the wild. And it was like sort of these exploitation films, and so it again had a very kind of short, kind of pathetic run, but he renamed it to Reefer Madness. That movie then kind of disappeared into obscurity, but then was rediscovered in the 1970s by Bob Shea. And he took the film and thought, this is ridiculous. Took the reels and started moving around the United States to college campuses, throwing it up on in their movie theaters, and people would smoke some marijuana and have a laugh at the ridiculousness of this film. So it became kind of a cultural icon after that, of people understanding just the ridiculousness of propaganda and misinformation, and how these sort of it was a laughable film. It was terrible and could only be enjoyed while smoking cannabis. That awful it was. So that's the movie Reefer Madness. Now, why the importance of Reefer Madness? Well, what had happened is that in 1936, at that time, there was a massive media mogul. His name was William Randolph Hearst. We still have the Hearst Corporation to this day, and William Randolph Hearst basically, if there was a city in the United States, he had a newspaper there. And and because of his dominance and he was a yellow journalist. Best way you could describe him was the Rupert Murdoch of his time. News Corp, William Randolph Hearst, all kind of the same thing. And so not great journalism, let's just put it that way. More of agenda serving a certain part of the population that had their own nefarious intentions. And so because he had pretty much a newspaper everywhere, he needed to feed those presses. And so he had a lot of investment in timberland, because he needed those trees to be turned into paper pulp, and the paper pulp then to be turned into his newspapers. And when he saw that cannabis, which was starting to be recognized, already, of course, it was a staple. Down in Kentucky, it was, even to this day, there's a massive history of hemp farming there, and that's actually where there's a surge of it happening again now. But it was a big plant for agriculture. If anything, the first American flag ever to be made was a hemp was made from hemp. If you were, Thomas Jefferson grew hemp. Every American was basically knew to grow hemp. It was a national security interest for the early part of the United States, Revolutionary War. Our navy was built on hemp. And our pharmacies were full of cannabis. And so it was just a normal staple. But Hearst recognized that the science was starting to see this plant to have a lot more uses. And one of those uses, of course, was for paper. History is that actually probably the first paper ever, printed by mankind in China was on hemp. And the great thing about hemp paper is that it has an acidity level that it doesn't degrade, break down as quickly as paper made from trees. All sorts of uses. But the other thing about hemp farming is that 1 hectare of hemp compared to 1 hectare of timber, it takes about 15 to 20 years to grow the same amount of paper pulp as can be grown in about 192 days with hemp for basically 6 times less water usage for hemp. And so it's just an incredible plant for paper. And so Hearst saw that as a threat to his timber investments, because at this point now he owned a lot of investment in timber. And then another little side thing was that DuPont at that time was starting to come up with all sorts of different kinds of synthetic fibers, polyester and rayon and all that kind of stuff. And hemp, again, strongest natural fiber. A hemp plant grows up to 14 feet, so the fiber is perfect for long rope, which is, most naval rope from human history was made of hemp. It also is antimicrobial, so it doesn't break down in nature. All of these kinds of things, and so he really leaned into demonizing this thing called hemp. First of all, his newspapers started describing it as marijuana because it had an insidious foreign sound to it. So marijuana had never been used as a name to describe hemp or cannabis up until that point, but then he put that into the American vernacular, and that was because sort of the anti-Mexican sentiment was on the rise in the United States after there was the sort of of course the states took California and all of these other places. There was a little
Right.
this is a good thing for him to do. So he started demonizing it. He also there was also a Harry J. Anslinger was very much an anti-marijuana person working for the United States. He created the drug. He created a drug wing after Prohibition was ended for alcohol. Suddenly there were a lot of men who were out of jobs going after the bad guys, and so they thought, okay, well, let's make something else bad. Let's go after that thing called cannabis, because also we're noticing a lot of jazz musicians and whatnot are smoking it, and they're making various music. Has a lot of grace notes in it, so perhaps we'll use this to target them. So, of course, in the United States, everything, when you really dig deep enough, there's a racial.
I was going to say we've already heard both the anti-Mexican slant here, and now we're getting to the anti African American jazz. Okay.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. So this whole sort of anti-marijuana movement started, and Reefer Madness was a part of helping to. What happened is that very quickly these newspapers were filled with all these stories of people taking one puff of the weed and then hacking their families to death, and it was just awful quotes of talking about cannabis making Negroes think that they can look at white women and step on white people's shadows and stuff like that. I mean, it's just, I can share with you quotes, just the most awful stuff that was just posted in all the newspapers across the United States. And so that created very quickly a movement in Congress to basically tax out of existence the ability to grow hemp, and almost within a year, hemp was just suddenly, crops were turned over. Hemp was no longer being grown in the United States, and then it turned into, I think, a human tragedy. 26 million people have been incarcerated for hemp slash cannabis usage, or even having it on their person, or even trying to grow it since 1936. And that's a human tragedy. Not only those 26 million people being incarcerated, but their families. They were then felons. They couldn't vote. It was and it was used primarily to target people. So, yeah.
I was about to say, given the demographics of what I've read on sentencing guidelines and so on and so forth, it seems like very convenient for the people who want to disenfranchise certain entire populations of the country.
Well, I mean, to put a point on it, John Ehrlichman, who was he was part of the Watergate scandal with Nixon, but he also worked on he was on Nixon's team. He basically admitted it, I think, in 1992 interview he did, basically saying that the reason why that the war on drugs that was created by Nixon, which basically just put the entire anti-cannabis movement on steroids, was that they were having a hard time with all of these people who were against the Vietnam War, and they couldn't incarcerate them for their political beliefs, but they noted that a lot of these anti-war protesters were smoking this thing called marijuana. So they thought, well, if we target that and make that, they were also maybe using heroin. If we target that, we can target them, put our political enemies in jail. And that did, and he admitted that. He said it's never. We knew it had nothing to do with the drugs. It was that we wanted to target them politically.
Okay, so far, what we're hearing is, number one, the reason that marijuana, number one, the reason it's marijuana and not hemp is pretty much rooted in racism and fear tactics and misinformation, and the use for it has been largely a propaganda use and a business use, because thanks to the illegalization of hemp, William Randolph Hearst has much more successful investments, and DuPont has wonderful markets for their artificial fibers, some of which could have been presumably people could have used hemp instead. So business and to some degree politics and racism sounds like it's actually at the heart of why this was illegal, has been made illegal in the first place. Now, somehow this became a business for you. How did this happen? I mean, were you sitting there? I think you're too young to have been hanging out at the 1968 Summer of Love, getting high and protesting the Vietnam War, but I could be wrong. How did you evolve into the Reefer Madness guy? And in particular, and I don't want to give too much away, but you have a number of different business angles on Reefer Madness. And I'd just love to hear that evolution from sweet young boy wandering around the park, gazing at the beauty of trees, to the Reefer Madness czar.
Yeah, well, I'd never heard of Reefer Madness up until 1999. I'm Canadian. My mother is Dutch. My dad is Scottish. I was born in Canada. I was raised there. Reefer Madness hadn't been on my radar at all. I was not a cannabis smoker. I was just a young man who, cannabis, that's terrible, but I'll smoke cigarettes and I'll drink alcohol. Those are okay. So I was an actor. I still am an actor, but I was an actor. I'm a third generation actor, and my parents both actors. My grandparents back in Holland also actors. And I was in Los Angeles from 95 to 2000, and in 1998, Kevin Murphy and Dan Studney, two friends from New Jersey, musical theater lovers, they wrote the show Reefer Madness, a satire, a musical satire, a rock musical satire of Reefer Madness. Sick. I didn't know them at that time. Dan Studney was working on a show called Party of Five. He was, I believe, a third AD on Party of Five, and my sister, Nev Campbell, was on Party of Five, and he said, listen, I've got this musical in my head, and we're starting to cast it right now, and I need a young all-American boy who can sing. And my sister was like, my brother is all-American looking. He looks like a baby, and so they brought me in, and they cast me as Jimmy Harper, the all-American boy who takes one puff of the weed, and suddenly his life just falls apart in 30 days. And that musical was only supposed to run for 2 months at the Hudson Theater on Santa Monica Boulevard. It ended up running for 2 years. It swept all of the awards that one could sweep in Los Angeles. It was then whisked off to New York. Only had a short run because it opened, sadly, 3 days after 9/11, which is not a good time to open a comedy about propaganda. And so,
hadn't even thought about that angle. Yeah, I was just thinking, oh, who's flying to New York on 9/13? But no, you're right. Yeah, there was a whole pro propaganda movement, I guess, right about then.
Right about that time. And I'd not known anything about the show until about the original 1936 movie until our director Andy Fickman made us all watch the 1936 film in order to sort of get us up to speed. And then we started educating ourselves as a cast as to sort of all of what Reefer Madness was to American history and to drug policy and all of that, while we were making this wonderful, funny, irreverent musical that audiences really loved. That short run that happened in New York actually booted us into doing an adaptation of it, a screen adaptation that we made in 2004, and then it premiered at the Sundance Film Festival, and it went on to win an Emmy Award. Reefer Madness, the movie musical. It was with Kristen Bell and Alan Cumming, myself, Nev, Anna Gasteyer, and it was a great film. We were really proud of having made it, and then we kind of set it off into the wild. And since then, that movie has gone on to become a cult phenomenon, much in the vein of Rocky Horror Picture Show, where Rocky Horror was a movie that didn't really succeed when it first came out, but then went on to become what we know it today. And that's what's happened now with Reefer Madness, the musical, the movie musical. It's become this cult film that young people, in a way, it's almost and I'm using this phrase intentionally, it's a gateway musical, in that anyone who watches it when they're young tends to become a musical theater lover afterwards. It's kind of for those rock and roll, under the radar type of people who are looking for the cool thing, and that's what this movie has since become. So here I am in the Reefer Den, and we are bringing it back for its 25th anniversary here in Los Angeles, where it all started. But this time around, what I'm doing is we're taking the musical, we've recast it. It's an entirely new cast. It's a new director, but it's the original creative team. So we've got Andy Fickman, our original director, both for the stage production as well as the movie, is producing. The writers are producing with us, and Alan Cumming and Kristen Bell, along with my wife, Enrico Olivo. We're all this crackerjack team of producers who really believe in this piece. All of the actors who have ever worked on this show, we all really believe in it because it's funny. It's really smart, and it's meaningful, and it's about it's really not about cannabis. It's about how techniques of propaganda and misinformation, and basically hugging the flag and carrying a cross and saying that we need to save our children, is a technique that's been used through the ages as a way of punching down on vulnerable communities, and usually for insidious and often monetary advantage of the powerful. And that's really what our show is about. So it kind of feels timely, given that there's a lot of other different kind of madnesses happening right now. We've got trans madness, we've got commie madness right now. We've got all sorts of things happening right now in the world, and we've got. I think we all need to be made aware that these techniques have been used in the past, and very effectively, and we're seeing we're still feeling the reverberations of Reefer Madness to this day. People still have a sort of a slant-eyed view of what cannabis is and what it does to people because of all of this misinformation over the years.
So, question: you skipped over a very important transition there. In 1999, right? You were this young baby-faced. You're still kind of baby-faced. You were this young baby-faced actor just going, Reefer Madness? I've never heard of that. And now you're bringing it back. Now, my understanding is that there's a little bit more business thought that is going into it these days. How did you transition from being, here I am, just happened to be an actor in a movie called Reefer Madness that I had never heard of before, and now this is an actual serious business interest of yours with multiple facets? How did that how and why did that transition happen, and what can you tell us about your plans for this?
What in 2015, two young people approached me and said, "Listen, Mr. Campbell, you know you're old when you call Mr. Campbell. Mr. Campbell, we love this show. This is how we discovered musical theater. We would love to do a charity concert for any charity you would like to do. If you would just help us bring back some of the original cast, and we just do a standing script in hand kind of performance of it." And so I helped them do this. They produced and directed, and I creatively pulled together all the people. And I didn't expect much of it because I think none of us were aware of what Reefer Madness had become to a whole community out there. What had happened is that the concert was oversold. People watched it on closed circuit television at New World Stages out in the lobby, and it was just this crazy affair. And that's when I turned to my wife and said, I think we should probably bring this show back. And so we started looking to bring the show back to New York. But then a whole bunch of things happened that got in the way of that happening. One of them being that business in New York for theater is just really difficult for off-Broadway theater. The business model is broken, which is a whole other thing we can talk about maybe a little later or in another interview. But COVID hit also and put the real kibosh on any plans to get the show up and running. But during that time, my wife and I thought, well, what could we do if we can't put on a show and we can't do anything? Let's think about this. And one idea we came up with is we thought, well, Reefer Madness was public domain up until 1999. Well, still was public domain until we turned it into our own show. And then we realized that we'd been showing usage of the words Reefer Madness since 1999. So we talked to some lawyers who were experts in this field, and they said, yeah, you guys can own the words Reefer Madness. And so during COVID, that's exactly what we did. We scraped together whatever money we had left over after our, first attempt at getting the show up and running in New York happened. And this is often how a lot of, oh boy, drills going through holes right now because in a construction site right now. I'm the foreman of this construction site. So we went and we've grabbed the words Reefer Madness. We now own the brand internationally, and we've trademarked it. We own it in multiple categories, and what we're looking to do is create a cannabis lifestyle brand. That with Reefer Madness cannabis lifestyle brand, and we've discovered through market research that we are not only the oldest cannabis brand in the United States, given that Reefer Madness has been in the vernacular now since 1936, but we are also the most famous, because if you ask people, the good chance is that they're not going to know about cookies, but they're going to know the words Reefer Madness. And not only that, Reefer Madness has now become what's called a proprietary eponym, like Kleenex or anything like that, in that it is now used in the press or by journalists as a way of describing hyperbolic misinformation and propaganda. And so it's if I have a Google alert that basically alerts me every day of the usage of the words Reefer Madness by journalists when they are talking about anything that has to do with cannabis, but even when it has to do with things that have nothing to do with cannabis, but they need to describe what is being done right now in order to punch down or to create nefarious kinds of agendas or get going. Right? So we now own those words. I want to create a brand with it, and in doing that sort of at the same time of doing this musical. The musical because I love it, the musical because I know that we have an audience out there that loves it, but I also see it as a marketing line item for the cannabis brand. And the cannabis brand is going to be a big focus for me probably over the next 5 years as I bring it to market. And my mission with the cannabis brand is to shine a light on the history of cannabis prohibition in the United States in a funny, irreverent way, and using that as a way to shine a light on propaganda writ large today. That is my one. And then my second mission is to also help people recognize the industrial potential of hemp, and that we need to online it fast. I want 100x hemp in the hemp industrial complex over the next 10 years. I want 100x that for the United States, if not for the world, because right now we are in trouble. And not only there was a human tragedy of 26 million people being incarcerated, the other tragedy was the climate tragedy of not having hemp being used as an agricultural and industrial product over the past basically 90 years. If we had been growing hemp and using that as a petrochemical instead of petrochemicals and using it for plastics, who knows where we would be today. I can go deeply into just how useful this crop is. If we had been able to leverage the ingenuity of the United States and its very creative, imaginative workforce and scientific workforce, we had been able to leverage that on the hemp crop over the past 90 years, as opposed to petrochemicals. Who knows what the world would look like right now? So I really want our brand to help to focus the United States and potentially change policy.
Cool. So we only have a few minutes left, but what I would love to do, because you've done this for me before, so I know that you can reel this off the top of your head. I am sitting here. 3 days ago, it was 60 degrees where I am, and it jumped from 60 up to 90. So I am sitting here doing my best not to sweat on camera and thinking about global warming. And you have pointed out that there are ways that hemp can be used as a less carbon intensive crop, or to replace more carbon intensive crops. Can you just give us a little bit of a rundown? Because I think most people, I know by most people I mean me when we first talked about it, and I will now project that onto everyone else. But I strongly suspect most people are really unaware of how and why this could be a much more environmentally friendly material that we could adopt virtually instantly in a lot of cases, because it's historically what we've used for things. Tell us about how it's a solution to global warming, or a part of the solution.
Part of the solution, and not a solution. It's going to be multifaceted for what we're going to do. But hemp as a crop, first of all, it's great to put into the rotation of farmers, because it's really good at putting nitrogen back into the soil. Not only that, it is great at carbon capture. It basically captures about 5 times more carbon than any other of our major crops that we grow in the United States. So growing hemp and then putting that and then utilizing that hemp as to create plastics. Hemp plastic is already being used by the Department of Defense for its drone technology, because hemp plastic is actually stronger than petrochemical plastic and lighter and easier to grow. And so as a carbon capture tool, it's amazing. Hempcrete, which has been used pretty much for the past 300 years. The French still have bridges standing that have hempcrete utilized in it. It is not necessarily for structural, but it is really great for anything aesthetic in terms of concrete. So if we were to utilize that in our architecture, it would be amazing. In terms of clothing, hemp, as opposed to all of the terrible waste that the clothing industry is doing right now to us, if we were to integrate hemp more into our clothing practices, would be amazing. In terms of food, hemp seed, which has been used now by the Chinese for thousands and thousands of years in their cooking, in their oils, is an incredible healthy oil as well as seed. It just goes on and on and on, all the things that we can utilize for it. So, but most importantly, if we were to throw this in the ground at scale, it's going to help to do carbon capture. It is going to help with nitrogen capture and refertilizing soils. And it is a weed. It's literally a weed. It's very easy to grow, very low on pesticides, uses 6 times less water than pretty much all of the major agricultural crops in the United States. So it's got amazing potential. I've become a proselytizer of it, and it's embarrassing because it sounds like I'm just like the dude, grow hemp, but it's a objective, scientific, practical standpoint is an amazing crop, and we need to online it for not only national security but for global security.
So I have to ask the question that's been on everyone's mind ever since you said that, have you ever actually smoked it recreationally, or is this entirely been an artistic and business endeavor for you, and environmental endeavor?
Of course I have. Okay. My mom's from Amsterdam, so there was no sort of there was no sort of demonization of cannabis, because the Dutch, of course, are probably one of the smartest civilizations on earth in terms of being progressive and ahead of the curve when it comes to a lot of issues politically and geopolitically. And so they got smart to this back in the 1960s, and of course, so we all know that. And so my mom, I was in Canada, but it's interesting though that the insidious anti-drug propaganda of the United States spread internationally, and it spread to Canada, because if you wanted to do business with the United States basically said, well, listen, if you're going to do business with us, you've got to basically pull out any hemp that you're growing in your country, and you need to make it illegal, because it is a global war on drugs. Did you hear that? Global. So get the fucking hemp out of your ground and start putting any, oh, by the way, Monsanto, handshake with them once you start growing some of their stuff. So that happened all over the world, where there had been hemp being grown for thousands of years by these cultures, and then pretty much overnight done. So even in Canada, it was a huge anti-drug sentiment because of Just Say No and Nancy Reagan, and I believed it hook, line, and sinker. So my mom kind of hid it from me that her friends all would smoke weed, but when she smoked weed, I didn't know what weed smelled like. So she would be out on the front and she would say, "Oh, honey, this is American tobacco," what she would say. So American tobacco. And so, and I believed her, but when I found out, I was just awful to her. I said awful things to her, and in my assessment of her was lowered because of all of these belief systems that had been put into my head by my education and by just this awful propaganda. And so I wasn't a pot smoker. Instead, I smoked cigarettes and I drank a lot of alcohol, because that was what you did, right, as a teenager. And that was that was not only the American thing to do, it was the right thing to do. And even though I wasn't American, but when I came to the U.S. and then after I was doing Reefer Madness, then of course I still really wasn't a pot smoker. I'd smoked intermittently a little bit, but it just made me hungry, and it just wasn't my thing. I was very focused in my life and blah blah blah, and just it wasn't one of the things. I was very sort of off the map when it came to drugs of any kind. And so yeah, I was kind of not a recreational, but I had tried it, and that was it. That was my approach to it. Since then, I've become a more regular smoker. I've found that I definitely prefer it over alcohol in terms of the effects of alcohol. I think, and now we're starting to see that alcohol is just it's terrible for us. It's just terrible.
I had two fathers. I had a father and a stepfather. My father got stoned every day, and my stepfather got drunk every day. And I mean literally both of them every day, as far as I know, for their entire lives. And I will tell you, having lived with a chronic daily pothead and having lived with a chronic daily alcoholic, I will take the pothead any day of the week. You know, the kind of conflict you get into, you know, is stuff like, "Hey, did you eat all of my potato chips? Oh man." You know, that was the conflicts with my father. The conflicts with my stepfather were, you know, things like him chasing me and my sister up the stairs, yelling and screaming at us and kicking our door down, you know, for having done something, like looked at him wrong. So, yeah, I get the.
I mean, there's a book called Blitzed, which talks about the influence of drugs in war, and how drugs are often used as a way of just sort of ramping up your soldiers, or ramping up. And you can tell a lot about a war by its drugs. But I'm wondering what would the past 90 years have looked like if maybe alcohol was lesser of the usages of getting people, because human beings are always going to want to change their minds. It's just what we are. We're curious beings. We're very intellectual, but because with that brain of ours, it can also be a torturous brain, and using drugs to help us change our perception is, I think, it's a very natural thing for us to have different perspectives. And imagine if cannabis had been used as a way of changing perspectives as opposed to alcohol. What might our geopolitical landscape and our legal landscape look like over the past 90 years?
Well,
what wars
right. There's a lot of that, because right now I'm watching fairly closely the use of psilocybin and LSD in therapy, and for some conditions, they're saying, wow, like a single facilitated psilocybin experience with someone who knows how to like help you debrief, that isn't with particular intention, can apparently cure or make tremendous leaps in one session in certain kinds of psychiatric and mental cognitive problems that we have no other treatment for, that, like, you know, these things go on for years and decades. And I think, you know, I mean, I don't know why these other drugs have been made class 1 substances, but I can easily imagine it being tied directly to wanting to disenfranchise the hippie movement and the counterculture of the 60s, which was when a lot of these were made illegal.
So we're just unwinding from all that right now. Thankfully, Biden and his administration have recognized this, and just recently, which is amazing given that we're doing Reefer Madness right now, it's quite historic. He's rescheduled cannabis from being a Class A drug, which basically put it on par with methamphetamine, heroin, and the worst of the drugs that truly can have really terrible effects on people. He's reclassified it to a Schedule 3 drug, which is on par with Tylenol, and that just happened, I think, in the past 3 weeks. So that's revolutionary for the United States. It's revolutionary for the war, because it's also going to change drug policy around the planet as well. And then we can get back to, just using it to hopefully make ourselves better. A lot of people, and I know we're going over here, but a lot of people don't know that the human, basically all mammals on the planet have what's called a cannabinoid system. And the cannabinoid receptor system is how our body regulates pretty much three things: our sex drive, our food drive, and how our body repairs itself. And so cannabis is a way of hacking that system. So cannabis is wonderful for making love. It's wonderful for if you want to get an appetite or enjoy food, and it also has an anti-inflammatory effect on the body that is now being recognized as truly medicinal. And so we need to just recognize that we've got a pretty important molecule here that can really help us repair our own systems and regulate our own systems. And like any medicine, the difference between poison and between medicine is dosage. So, just because we have it doesn't mean we just get blazed all the time, but use it as a medicine, and use it as something that can help to regulate and make ourselves better, and hopefully our world better.
Sure. Well, and as we all know, one of the best ways to do that is musical theater. So before we sign off here, could you tell us... Could you tell us, you are currently in the dressing room, one of the dressing rooms, which implies that you have a show coming up soon. When, where, how can people find out about it?
Reefer Madness, the musical. We are going to be opening May 30th here in Los Angeles at what we are building is a music venue called the Reefer Den, which will be hosting Reefer Madness, the musical. It's at 6555 Hollywood Boulevard, right smack dab on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. And this is probably the hardest thing I have ever done in my life. We are opening a musical, a Broadway level musical, I might add. I just am so impressed with our cast, but also our creative team and our technical team. Los Angeles is very much a ninja theatrical town. It's got incredible people to work with. But then we're also opening a live music venue, the Reefer Den, which is going to be leaning into just sort of postmodern jukebox, the American Songbook, and musical theater as a live music venue for people in Los Angelinos to find that space, because that space really doesn't exist here for people. And then outside, we're going to be creating an oasis right in the middle of Hollywood called the Victory Garden, which will be this outdoor oasis where people can just enjoy themselves and have some cocktails and maybe smoke on a vape, and then go inside and watch a really funny musical comedy. And what I'm looking to build is community. Because I think what's really missing right now in the world is in real life contact with one another, and so we're creating a place where you can basically just park your car once and stay for the entire night and enjoy yourselves and meet common-minded people and laugh and listen to music and just enjoy yourself.
So as soon as you have it up and running in LA, I want one in Boston. I'm just saying.
Yeah. Who knows? I mean, who knows? Right now, I do see this as a prototype for something that can then be ported, because, musical theater's always been it's always been a hard business, because there's only so many butts you could put in seats, so many paying customers, right? So this business model we're doing, where we're integrating a restaurant, a bar, a live music venue, post-show live music venue, and theater, this is a way that I can create multiple verticals so that can help to support the musical theater show and keep things running and keep people employed. And if it works here, then we can port that to other cities around the United States and potentially go on tour and see what happens. Yep.
Awesome. So people can find you at reefermadness.com,
Yes.
and they can find the musical and the Reefer Den there as well.
Yep, it's all there, and you can find all of our social handles. Reefer the musical. You can follow us there, and check out what's going on with us, and see sort of this wild ride we're on right now. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us. I'm gonna toss the screenshot of the musical up on the screen, and with that, it has been a joy to talk to you. Been here with Christian Campbell for those of you watching, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Stevers. Take care.